The man in the photograph. It's creepy. I don't like it, James said, still carefully scanning the photo despite his statements. I sat in silence. I thought the photo was creepy as well, but not to the extent that James did. I just wasn't so sure what it was about the photo that scared him as badly as it did. I think it's interesting, I said, curling my finger. He caught the motion and handed the photo back to me. You would, wouldn't you, Tony? He gave me a light push. How'd you even get this thing anyways? I perked up. I knew how I'd received it and how it came into my possession, but I didn't actually know how the photo came to be. I didn't know anyone who was a photographer, and I certainly didn't know anyone capable of naturally capturing a photo such as the one I'd received earlier. I said. Well, I went to check my mail, like I usually do. I open it up and it's just there. No other mail either. I mean, makes sense considering it's Sunday, but still. So it just appeared in your mailbox? James asked. Bullshit. You already saw it yourself, I said. It's just the photo, nothing more. That and there's no return address. The statement sent a small chill throughout my body. I'd known from the moment I examined it a little more closely that it had to have been placed directly in my mailbox, but it still unnerved me to know that whoever had given me this photograph knew where I lived. Yeah, he said. I mean, who do you think could have put it in there? He was tapping his foot rapidly on the floor now. I could feel the slight vibrations of it in the couch. Well, I don't know anyone who could have taken it. I mean, Ben's pretty good at taking pictures, but he just does it for fun. And I couldn't begin to tell you how, well, this. I pointed at the figure in the photograph. James took it back and looked at it again. Yeah, he said. I just can't. It's so freaky. I didn't know if he had meant to do it, but James put the photograph in his jacket pocket. Must have done it unconsciously. Hey, I tried to say. James cut me off. I mean, who takes a photograph like that? He said. It's weird. You think you'll be all right? You're a little more used to looking at this stuff than I am. I opted to give up on notifying him. He'd find out that he had the photo when he emptied his pockets, and then he'd surely give it back to me. Well, I won't dwell on it for too much longer, I said. I mean, if they put it in my mailbox, they probably know me personally, yeah? I'll just throw the photo away and go on with my life. Not a big deal. James's face shifted from slightly creeped out to his default neutral look. Yeah, okay. I think that's a good way to go about it. He got up from my couch and went over to the entrance hallway of my apartment. I think I'm gonna go. That photo's got me wigged out. I got up and walked over to him. All right, man, I said. Sorry if I really creeped you out with that. It's just, I thought it was interesting and that you'd like it, with you being into horror and all. Can't believe I'm saying this, but I think, for once, that was too much. Too... not human. I don't know, it's fucking weird, man. He put his shoes on and went to open the door. I tried to apologize to him again. Hey man, I really am sorry, just don't be too mad at me. He opened the door and began to walk out. Just before he left, he turned around. Well, I'm not mad now, but I can't say I won't be mad if I get nightmares. Dick, I said. Later, he left and the door closed, leaving me alone in my apartment with some questions, mostly questions regarding the photograph. I didn't have to worry about looking at it, as the first thing I did when I received it was take a photo of it on my actual phone. I didn't do much for the rest of the day. Not enjoyable stuff anyways. I cleaned the apartment, reorganized some stuff, watched some TV, did laundry, and eventually made dinner. After I ate, I sat down at my desk in my room and thought about what I'd do for the rest of the night. That was when I thought of the photograph again. I thought of how creepy it looked and what it made me feel. I felt the need to examine it a little more closely. I pulled out my phone, turned the brightness all the way up, and set it down on my desk. I went to my phone gallery and selected the photo. A shudder ran down my spine. Similarly to the first time I saw the photo, it was jarring and caught me off guard. I'll do my best to describe what was in the photograph. The first thing I noted was the lack of light. The photograph was very clearly taken at night, but there was something else. The atmosphere was gloomy, eerie. There wasn't a star in the sky, nor the moon. The only light in the photo seemingly was the flash on the camera it was taken with. It looked like the photograph was taken just a few hundred feet away from the entrance of a forest. The trees were dark, but not so much that I couldn't make out what they were. They were thick, too. Thick trunks, thick leaves. They smothered the space in the forest and made it impossible to see what was inside it. There was one thing I could see, though, and that was what shook James so badly. On the far left of the photograph, almost impossible to make out, was a man standing just in front of the forest entrance.
Well, calling him a man wouldn't exactly be the correct way of going about it. He looked like a man, mostly. He wore blue jeans and a green t-shirt, but that was the extent to which he was clothed. His legs and one of his arms were mostly normal sized, albeit a bit lanky. His right arm was too long for a normal human body. The area near his legs was hard to make out, but his arm drooped down to it, and I couldn't see where it ended. His chest was normal too, but his head, I could see why it had scared James so badly. The man's head looked too big for his body. He had hair, but it was wispy and downy, like a newborn's. His head was the only part that was big, though. Everything else was too small. His eyes were tiny. If I had to estimate, I'd say that in comparison to the rest of his head, they looked like small olives. They were pure white and looked like they were just there, not bordered in any color, just there. It was uncanny. His nose wasn't pronounced, if I could even call what he had a nose. It was more like he had nostrils in his face, 2 slits way too far down from his eyes, too far to be normal. His mouth couldn't be normal either. It was similar to his nose in that it wasn't pronounced, but rather a semi-large slit across his face. It was about 3.5 inches long. The mouth was parted, and his teeth didn't look solid. They seemed to be fat, pearly balls in his mouth, white bulbous lumps, swollen and bulging from his gums. His ears were small too, but those weren't much to look at. I had to say, it felt a lot more frightening looking at the photo when the sun had set. It being light out earlier had given me some form of relief. I felt safe in the daylight. But now I felt vulnerable, like the thing in the photograph was watching me. I closed my blinds and locked my door. I got into my bed and kept the lights on. If it was dark, I might not have been able to get to sleep. Not that it mattered, because I ended up having a nightmare. At first, there was darkness. Then I was able to see. My heart began to thump rapidly when I found out where I was. I'd found myself in the location where the photo was taken. The complete lack of general light and the eerie atmosphere didn't help my increasing anxiety. What nearly pushed me over the edge was when I tried to move my legs and found that I couldn't. I panicked and tried to move, but I couldn't do a thing. That was when I looked up. He wasn't where he was in the photo originally. He was moving. I could hear as his freakishly long arm dragged along the ground. He reached me, but before he could do anything, the nightmare ended, and I woke up. I was sweaty and breathing heavily. When I realized that what had happened wasn't real, I fell back into the bed. Relieved, I fell into a slightly less terrifying slumber this time. That was yesterday. Today, I woke up to the sounds of someone rapidly banging on my door. I got up and out of bed. I trudged towards the entrance of my apartment. I got to the door, unlocked it, and opened it. The first thing I saw was the photograph. James pushed it into my hands and started to speak frantically. I had a nightmare. Shit, I said. So did I. About him, he said. Yeah, I replied. What was yours? He asked. I was in the place the photo was taken, and he tried to do something to me. He didn't end up doing anything, but it still scared me. I replied. He was in my house, in mine. It felt so real. He opened my bedroom door and crawled on top of me. Felt like I was suffocating. I screamed and pushed him off. When I woke up, he was gone. Just a dream. Wow, I said. Yeah, he said. I'm going home, going to sleep so I won't be tired. You need to burn that photograph. Now.
before I could answer, he was gone. I didn't do much today, mostly just rested and prepared to burn that photograph. I haven't heard from James, probably because he's resting. I decided that I'd take the photo and burn it outside. Tonight, the photograph would be gone and James and I would be released from the nightmare. I decided that I'd do it after dinner. Just before I went outside, though, I thought of examining the photo one last time. I don't know why I did it, and I wish I hadn't, but I did. I sat down at my desk once more. I pulled out the photograph and examined it closely. I very quickly noticed that something was wrong. Something was off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, though. I took another photo of the physical photograph. I opened up the photo editing app on my phone and layered the two together. I made the first layer visible and made the second invisible. Then I did the opposite. I looked and looked and looked until I found out what was wrong. It was on the far left side of the photograph. In the first picture I had taken, the man was stood in front of the forest, his head still too large for his body. As I looked at the second photo, my heart sunk. I turned my phone off and looked at the physical photograph. The man was gone. It looked only like a photo of a creepy forest. My next move was to try and call James. I picked up my phone and went to his contact in my phone app. I clicked the call button and waited with bated breath. I only got a message. The person you're trying to reach is not available. Please try again later.
The bus doesn't stop for me anymore. Part 1. Series. 3 years ago, I ruined my life. I ruined my wife's life, and I ruined my son's life. He was only 8. I always walked him to the bus. He would even occasionally hold my hand. My wife couldn't walk him. She was out of the house before 5 for her bakery job, and it meant I was always left to look after young Leroy. The bus was always a fun time for the small boy. It was back roads all the way up to his school and my work, so it was usually just us and Gary. Gary was an older man who would travel with his grandson. I remember Gary because he always wore a nice black suit, black shirt underneath, and oddly, a black tie on top. He was quite old, mid-70s minimum. The kid with him is harder to picture. Whenever I envisioned a child from memory, Leroy would always creep into their spot. Like every single young child in my life was a carbon copy of my son. The odd thing about Gary's grandson was how often he would be asleep. Only on occasion would he be open-eyed, staring at the back of the seat in front of him. Gary was lovely to talk to, so wise and thoughtful. He spoke like a poet or a man out of time, almost like a ghost in an old folk tale. Leroy would be enthralled by Gary's tales, what he did in his younger years. Even though he would often misunderstand words or phrases, Leroy would love to listen. One morning, I slept through my alarm, or maybe I dismissed it in a sleepy haze, or maybe I forgot to set an alarm. When I naturally blinked myself awake, the house was cold and silent. The sun had already risen, and I had slept past my shift start. I launched myself out of bed, calling for my son through the freezing walls and waiting for an annoyed grumble or a pissed-off what, but nothing came. I thundered down the hallway and swung his door open. "Come on, little man, Daddy screwed up," I said as I looked in, but there was no sign of the boy. His bed was made and his backpack was gone. I ran into the kitchen and he wasn't there either. Instead, there was a note. It was written in his perfectly awful chicken scratch, a rock placed on top to weigh it down. "Dear Dad, you were snoring, so I packed my bag and am walking to the bus now. I love you." Beneath the writing was a drawing of the clock on the wall. If it were to be read correctly, he left around 7:30, the usual time he and I would leave. I ran my fingers through my hair and muttered, "Fuck, fuck, fuck," under my breath. Still in my underwear, I ran to the front door and it was wide open for the world to see. Leroy was too short to pull the door shut by the handle, and so often tried yanking it shut by the side and it would fail to latch fully. I stared out into the world that swallowed my boy and started to cry.
In my heart, I hoped and begged the universe that he would be safe, but there was something ruthlessly tugging at my guts telling me he was gone, utterly vanished into nothingness. I pulled the door shut and it clicked. I hustled back to my room and called his school. He wasn't there. I threw on some pants and pulled an old stained sleeping shirt over my head and called my wife. As I called, I ran, sprinted to the bus, checking every nook and cranny between neighbors' houses and looking into trees and bushes. My wife screamed at me through the receiver, calling me ungodly names that I still shrink into myself thinking about. As I reached the stop, there was no sign of the boy, just a vacant bench and a sun-bleached timesheet for the bus. I collapsed onto the bench and hung up on my wife, dialing the police. My wife and I split. We had to. She hated me, and I hated myself more. I still remember locking eyes with her as she came through the door on the fateful day. It wasn't sadness. It was unfiltered rage, pure resentment for me. Her first response was to yank a cop out of the way and stab my face with her car key, leaving a horrendous scar that burned for a month after. I quit my job and used my savings to keep myself afloat for the next year and a half. I was abandoned at my house with Leroy's dusty, rotting toys. The cops found essentially nothing. A single ring doorbell picked up my son walking past their house at 7:35, the final minute my son was seen alive or even seen at all. I kept the video. I watch it at least once a week. He looked so scared, his head darting around at any and all noises, his first walk alone. The bus we took was old, it had no cameras aboard it, and when the driver was questioned, he claimed he never remembered my son getting on. But apparently, Gary did. His response was as odd and whimsical as per usual. The boy got on the bus, he sat with me like they all tend to, rode till the end. If it weren't that day, it was the day after. They questioned Gary on and off for months, but he was found innocent. His response was apparently a tale, a warning to the officer who he knew how to child. When my money ran out, I started to starve. I bought less and less food. I didn't want to work, I wanted to be home as often as I could, and so I rationed my money, but eventually it ran too low and I got my old job back, a simple clerk at a bookstore. I dreaded knowing what that meant. I needed to take my old bus again. I trudged down the roads I did most weeks to get the midday bus to get food, but during the early hours of the morning, the streets felt haunted. Every so often, I would see a blur or an animal darting away from my sight, and I would tell myself it was him, hiding from me, scared. I had to shake the feeling to stop myself from crying. I reached the bus stop and planted myself down, tapping the heel of my work shoes onto the concrete. I had an odd anticipation welling in my gut, like I would see Leroy on the bus, older, waiting for me. As it squealed to a stop at exactly 8 o'clock, I entered. The driver was the same as from a year prior, a middle-aged black man named Grant. He squinted at me and his jaw briefly dipped in confusion. "Freddie? You're back." I just nodded and tapped my card against the reader, hoping it still worked. The light flicked green and Grant took off. I saw his eyes looking at me as I sat down, a few seats in front of Gary. "Hey, son." His voice flowed through the air like an old memory. "You holding up well enough?" I turned in my chair and stared into his cheery eyes with my vacant sockets. "No, Gary, I'm not well at all." I swiveled back and stared at my bus card that I tapped against my palm. "Sorry about you, boy." His voice retained a wrinkle of a smile. It made me sick. "I promised he got all the way to the final stop." I stood up and stormed over to him, trying to stay upright as the bus drove around corners and over bumps. "What the fuck is that supposed to mean, Gary?" I spat through gritted teeth. "Oh, Fred, he was here. He was okay." He frowned a genuine frown, and guilt rose in my stomach. "Try not to swear, please. There's a kid present." I looked down at his grandson. Gary ran his fingers through his blonde hair, and the boy smiled softly in his sleep. I went to apologize, and the bus lurched to a stop suddenly. I caught myself on the handle of a seat and spun around. Even with so much time that had passed, the bus stopping at a stop between the first and the school was unnatural to me and threw me off.
I turned to face the front and saw a younger man get on. He had too many freckles and a messy clot of red hair. His arms were covered in small bruises and scars, and his face had small red blotches on it. Looking at his pale knuckles, his hands were noticeably purple. He tapped his card, and then a snarl grew across his face as he looked at me. "What the fuck are you doing to poor Gary?" he yelled to me, and I was thrown off, pausing for only a second. "Hey!" "Nothing, man, nothing," I said back like a loser, whimpering at a man 5 years my junior. Gary stuck his old shaking hand up. "Please stop it with this bothersome swearing. Freddie here was just catching up with me, not attacking me or causing any distress." The young man blew a vicious line of air through his lips and scratched his arm awkwardly. "Sorry, dude. Poor Gary got hurt by some old drunk a couple of days back. Thought it was time for round 2. He chuckled to himself, and I realized where the bruising across his body came from. "You gave him the work then," I said, gesturing to his flesh adornments. "Yes, sir. Fucker could barely walk after." "Nice. Thanks for looking after this one." I half-assed waved towards Gary and found a new seat. As I looked back to my fading card, I felt the seat dip next to me and looked to see the man staring at me. I could already tell what he was looking at. My scar. My wife gave it to me. I deserved it, though. Cheat on her? Lost her son. He ran his fingers through his knotted hair, and then it clicked in his brain. "You're that Fred. Gary told me about you. A lost soul wandering a track of despair, heading to the station of doom or some shit." He swung around to look at Gary. "Right?" Gary huffed. "The basic idea, I suppose." The red-haired fighter then looked me in the eyes. "Sorry about your son. He's alive. I can feel it." "Thanks," I mumbled, looking away, tears filling my eyes. "Oh, also bad news, big man," he said in a joking tone. "I think I took your job." The man and I got acquainted pretty quickly after that. He was a fast talker and was able to distract me out of my depressed stupor for minutes at a time. He was Caden Walker, and he literally took my old job, and I was moved to the back room, cataloging and pricing donated books. I got Caden's number and ended up texting him immediately. He was a good change of pace and was funny to boot. I took the next few weeks one day at a time, boarded the bus, caught up with Gary and his grandkid, and then moved to sit with Caden. Gary never seemed to mind. He liked being alone with his boy, holding him tight enough that he wouldn't sway or fall, but not too tight to wake him or hurt his little arms. Caden quickly became a good friend. We even got beers after work a few times, and I grew, ever so slowly, happy again. I still waited on my front patio every evening, waiting for Leroy, hoping for him, but at least now the buzz of my phone and a shitty meme I didn't understand would lighten the mood ever so slightly. Then Gary spoke to me one morning and shifted everything back into place. Like a bulldozer, he set the ground flat again, and my attempt to climb the hill to peace was quashed. "You're more observant than most, Fred." He spoke with slight malice in his breath, and it took me out of my distracted staring at the quickly passing trees. "Pardon?" I shot back, confused at what I'd seen and they all missed. He straightened his back and nestled his grandson closer to himself. "You still miss the subtle things in my stories, though, just like your son." My mind began to go ever so cloudy. My hands trembled, and I let him continue. "Your son couldn't ever find the message, the reason I told him about my stories, my warnings." He swallowed and continued, now with a saddened frown. "If he had, he wouldn't have passed on. He wouldn't have reached the end of the line." I rose from my seat and stared down at his frail body, and he didn't flinch, just slowly ran his thumb through the sleeping boy's hair. "Please get to the point, Gary." He chuckled. "Missed it again. Another warning flies by." "Gary," I said sternly. "Who do you think I am? Do you think I'm Gary?
Are you sure? My head spun and I nearly stumbled back to my seat. His words always had a sense of dread to them, like I missed an awful point I shouldn't have. I don't know. Are you Gary? The question felt so odd to ask. Am I Gary? I was asking if the man I knew was Gary, if he was the man I knew as Gary, and yet asking him felt so important. He perked up. Do you want the literal answer or the metaphorical answer? I don't know. It doesn't really matter. Both answers are the same. He snickered and his crooked finger rose to beckon me in. I leaned down so he could whisper in my ear. I felt so foolish, so belittled, but I wanted to know why he brought up Leroy. I wanted to know if he knew something. He spoke, and the warmth hit my ear from his wrinkled lips. I'm the Grim Reaper. I take them to the end of the line. The bus jolted to a stop, and I crashed into the floor as Caden walked on, laughing at my tumble. Whoa, stop the shit, man, down, he bellowed out, cupping his hands over his mouth. He leaned over to scoop me up, and I looked at his pale face and blue eyes. His bruises were clearing up, and he had such a warm smile. I began to cry. The remainder of the bus ride, I felt nauseous. I wanted to ask more, but it felt wrong, too. It felt more like I had the pieces to a puzzle and needed to shape them back together. Asking for a clue would yield nothing. At work, I couldn't concentrate and mislabeled nearly 5 books in a row, so I excused myself and went home early. At my house, I ignored text after text from Caden. He was sending messages, asking if I was okay, if I needed help. I responded only with, I'll see you at work tomorrow. I ended up searching the roads near my house for Leroy that night. I had no exact reason, just felt like I hadn't done it in a while. I fell asleep on the patio, waking up covered in mosquito bites and dirt in my hair. I checked his room, hoping he wandered back in as simply as he had wandered out, but there was no such luck. I pulled my work shirt on, sprayed an ungodly amount of deodorant on, and stumbled down the road to the bus stop. I rolled my phone in my hand, working out in my head what I would say to Gary, what I would ask him. I couldn't tell if I liked him or hated him, if what he said was meant to be kind or cruel, helpful or to deter me. I couldn't tell if he knew everything or nothing at all. I planted myself on the bench and waited. I saw the bright 55 tumble over a hill and rose to get on, but the bus didn't stop. It just drove past me. The last thing I saw was Gary smiling and the top of his grandson's head, his brown hair drooping down and covering his ears. Then the bus vanished into the distance.
The vines in my backyard won't stop growing. Series. Things were never easy for me. They were also never hard. If you were to pass me on the street, you would not remember me. That's okay. I get it. There isn't anything memorable about me. I'm 5'8" and white, with an average look about me. I got through my state school studies with little effort and less praise. B's get degrees. B's also get you a boring job, a mid-level job as a credit analyst just outside of Atlanta. The only remarkable part of this story is the house. I had begun to lose hope of finding any suitable living arrangements within my price range, and then out of the blue, I found it. A classic country house with a large backyard leading into the forest behind. I bought it sight unseen. Then I made my arrangements and headed out. The house was magical. It felt as if it were from a different era. The porch was a magnificent white with red trim. The house had an old money feel as you entered and saw the staircase leading upstairs with the dark emerald green walls. I expected the place to be a mess, but it was not. It was well kept, with next to no dust on the walls or shelves. I began to unpack the U-Haul alone, and it quickly became obvious that I did not have enough personality to fill this manor. With ease, I set up my new life inside the house. The empty room was a reminder of the things I had missing in my life. To relax, I made myself some sweet tea. I decided to try to fit in with the locals and headed to my back porch.
The backyard was expansive, with grass and weeds growing together. It had a pull to it that I felt magnetized to spend as much time as I could out there. The forest behind it was dark, and the floor was covered with a tangle of some sort of vine. I later learned it was called kudzu. I began to think about the possibility that I have a life worth remarking on here. In a way, I did. My neighbors live relatively far away, but close enough to see the lights from their back porch. A kind man named Creed dropped by when he saw the truck. "Hey there, I'm Creed, and I'm living down the street from you," he said in his charming drawl. "Oh, hello. How are you doing today?" I said back to him, noticing the dog at his side. "I might," he responded. "I just figured I'd come by and introduce us to you. This here is my dog Jasper. He might be a little noisy at night, so if he keeps you up, don't be scared to give me a holler." The white and black patched dog wagging his tail patiently. "Oh, that shouldn't be a problem. I'm a very heavy sleeper, but if it does, I will," I said with a fake light chuckle. Small talk was never one of my strengths. "Well, good. I guess I'll let you get back to your business. But if you need anything, just let me know. It's just me and Jasper at the house, so we'd be happy to help," he said, beginning to walk back down the driveway towards his house. "There is one thing," I said, and Creed turned back around. "I noticed some sort of vines ticking over the forest behind my house. What is that?" "Oh, that'd be the kudzu, a tough bugger of a plant. It came over from Asia and the government wanted to help combat corrosion, something like that. Of course, they didn't realize how fast it grew. It's said to grow about a foot a day and just suffocate everything underneath it. Once it gets a hold of you, no light can pass through. Sometimes, at night, I swear you can hear it grow. Or I'm just going senile. Maybe both could be true. If it starts to be a problem, just buy some goats and they'll tear right through it in no time. They love eating that stuff." "Huh, good to know. Thanks, Creed. I'd better get back to unpacking," I said with a wave. He waved back and said, "All right, you take care now." I liked Creed. He'd been one of the only people to go out of his way for me my whole life. I had about a week before I started at work, and I spent that time settling in and getting the house situated. The house seemed in pristine condition, as if the people before me had left minutes before I arrived. Creed said that the house was empty for quite some time, and the people who lived there before me didn't last more than a week before they packed up and left. He never knew why they left so suddenly. On the Monday of my first week at work, I found myself becoming quite excited. I hoped that maybe the southern hospitality I felt from the Creed would carry over to my coworkers. My commute to work was about 25 minutes without traffic, 32 minutes with traffic. Traffic never bothered me. Why would I be upset about something outside of my control? All I had to do was turn up my music and enjoy the ride. Work was fine. The people were cold, though. Every ounce of effort I put into a relationship with them became a futile effort. I found that if I wasn't a fan of the local college, then I had nothing to talk to them about.
"What do you mean you don't like the dogs?" Andrew would ask me. "If you're gonna live here, you gotta be a dogs fan, or you might as well get the hell out of here." Sarah, the woman in the office who caught my eye, agreed with Andrew. "Come on, you gotta just force being a Bulldogs fan." "I just don't like sports, guys. Sorry," I said with a sad defiance. I decided to dive into my work and easily fell into a rhythm, reading reports and judging companies on their ratios. I tried other options of befriending them to no avail. They were friendly, but not my friends. I never really had any friends. I was always the fourth option in a world that usually accommodated three. There isn't really anything special about me. My nights were spent making spaghetti or any other Italian dish, and eating in front of the TV. I would head to bed early and fall asleep fast with the sounds of Jasper barking as my lullaby. For about a month I did this, and it was the farthest from unhappy I had ever been. Creed would stop by bringing me all sorts of southern treats. They ranged from a pitcher of sweet tea to pecan pie. I got the feeling that he was just as lonely as me. "You gotta be familiar with the tastes of where you live now, or you'll stick out like a sore thumb," he would say. I never stuck out. I always blended in. Then one night, I finally found the secret to truly being happy. I was asleep as I normally would when I dreamt of my backyard, standing in the back door looking out into the night. The kudzu that infested the forest behind my home began to crawl and slither closer to my house. Just as quickly as it started, it stopped. At the edge of the vines, I saw a figure, an incomprehensible shadow pressing against my consciousness, pointing at what my mind decides was an arm to the middle of the backyard. The sweet smell of damp dirt mixed with an unfamiliar floral scent filled my nostrils. "Dig," it whispered deep inside my skull. It was a soothing voice that scratched the deepest part of my thoughts. A mix of a perfect feminine voice and a soothing male patriarch voice. I found myself in the backyard, and before I could think, I was kneeling before it, digging. My hands tore through the soft, wet earth with ease, and a pleasure ran through my synapses as I dug. With a jolt, I woke up to my alarm. I looked out my window to see the undisturbed earth, and the kudzu had returned to its resting place in the forest. It had only been a dream, or so I thought, as I realized my hands were sore with the pain of exhaustion. What had really happened to me that night?
Be wary visiting the bank on Southeast 55th Place. In the midst of achieving my 4-year neuroscience degree, I made the executive decision to take a gap year in order to study avian psychology through my own research and expeditions. I've always been fascinated by birds. Well, one bird in particular. Crows. I knew from the get-go that crows are incredibly smart, and through this, I had made the determination to perform various observational studies on the birds in order to truly dissect how and why they underwent their daily operations. What I have found in these studies has left me in a harrowing predicament. Whether to accept the close of my gap year with grace and return to college with my findings, or whether I must take additional time off to further my research and dig myself deeper into the trench I have excavated at a terrifying rate. I began by following the crows on foot. I soon realized the creature's flight patterns were unpredictable and rendered it impossible to catch up with them. So I executed Plan B, planting microchips in a bowl of food and leaving it out for them. I made sure the chips were concealed and could be ingested quickly and easily by the crows. This led to the study of the subject I dubbed Crow 1, as I do not have the means to grant my subjects with proper titles. The use of microchips meant that I could follow my subjects by car. Crow 1 performed many circles, but eventually settled in a corner of my local park. Upon further inspection, I located the nest in which the bird resided, along with several of its comrades. I observed a total of 9 crows crowding around the nest, which sat in the apex of a large tree's branches. I attempted to detail the site further by using my zoom camera, but the angle at which I sat was inadequate for clear observation. I remained in the same location for 2.5 hours, watching the crows scuttle around something I could not see, something I assumed to be crow eggs or crow babies, though the mature crow's behavior would have been strange in that regard. The only resources I observed them bringing to the nest were varying sizes of sticks and wood chips, which they placed inside the nest, as if it was empty. And eventually, each crow departed from the nest one by one. It was nearly dark by now, and I decided at once to climb the tree. The tree was not easy to climb as it had a very large, wide base, but I had anticipated this and maneuvered my way up by fastening a rope around the tree, tying the ends to the harness I bore on my abdomen, and letting my arms and legs do the bulk of the travel. It was a tremendous climb, but at last, I was nearing my prize. I moved my rope around one of the tree's branches, with some difficulty, so I could observe the nest from above. I turned on my flashlight and shined it towards the nest.
Within the walls of the nest, instead of eggs, lie a tan sheet of cloth fitted to the inside of the structure. On top of the cloth lie an arrangement of sticks, tens of hundreds of tiny little sticks, ordered in a familiar pattern of squares and lines. Within one of these squares, there were 2 wood chips that had been placed in an X shape. I made the stark determination that I was looking at a map. I opened up my navigation app, and to my horror, it displayed a near-perfect replica of what I was seeing inside the nest. In place of the wood chip X on my phone's map was the bank. To further my unease, I received a notification that Crow A was coming home earlier than anticipated. I quickly snapped a picture of the nest and scrambled to untie myself and quickly slide down the tree. I received a few splinters on the way down, but made my escape just as I heard Crow A and his comrades encroaching upon the nest and a hasty flurry of squawks and wings flapping. At once I felt very threatened by the events that had just ensued and ran head over heels through the darkness and back to my car. I drove home in silence, letting the absurdity of the situation fill the empty space. I reviewed the photo when I returned home, half expecting it to simply vanish once I decided to observe it again. But alas, it stood there waiting to taunt me. At once I pondered what I might do with this information. This is precisely why I've turned to the subreddit, as although I am revealing something very critical to potentially a vast amount of people, I feel miles more uncomfortable explaining my situation to my friends or colleagues, as I believe they would jump to question my whereabouts and would find a hard time believing I didn't plant the configuration myself. Unfortunately, I believe the only resolution to this scenario is simply waiting for something to set into place, while continuing my observations and reinstating my technology once the chip has passed through Crow A's digestive system. I'm unsure as to what might happen, but I bear a terrible unease for what might lie ahead. As to why this is the community I have chosen to bring awareness to my discoveries, if I am not to be taken seriously, my story will be regarded as a farce, rather than a vile attempt at dissuasion towards those of higher status than myself. If I do, regrettably, decide to return to college and abandon all control of the situation, I will leave you with a warning. Be wary visiting the bank on Southeast 55th Place. I am waiting in terrific anticipation. I may return to the nest in the next few days, but I need some time to think.
Something in the cornfields took the woman I loved. I'm 40 now. I have a life that on paper looks just fine. A small apartment in a city far from home, a job that pays the bills, a cat that ignores me unless she's hungry. And I have a scar. It's a thin, pale trio of lines on my left forearm that never tans and is always, always cold to the touch. It's a permanent reminder of the night I learned that some things don't just disappear, they get replaced. I'm telling you this because for 24 years, I've told no one. I'm telling you this because a small, stupid part of me holds on to the impossible hope that she's out there, somewhere, and she'll read this. Growing up in Harmon, Kansas was like living in a shoebox with the lid on tight. The town was a flat patch of dust and faith, surrounded on all 4 sides by an ocean of whispering cornfields. Life revolved around 2 things, the harvest and the First Baptist Church of Harmon County. God wasn't just a concept, he was a neighbor, the kind who watched you through the curtains and kept a detailed list of your every misstep. I'd checked out of the whole religion thing by the time I was 12. I could see the hypocrisy plain as day. The same deacons who preached charity would foreclose on a struggling family's farm. The women who led the chastity pledge group were the town's most vicious gossips. But in a town like Harmon, checking out wasn't really an option. You went to church, you bowed your head, you pretended to believe, or you became a pariah. So I played my part. I wore the floral print dresses, I mumbled the hymns, and I counted the seconds until the sermon was over. It was on one of those suffocating Sunday mornings that I met Amy. I was outside the fellowship hall, trying to discreetly peel the label off my water bottle, when a plume of smoke drifted past my face. I looked up, and there she was, leaning against the peeling paint of the church wall, a lit cigarette pinched between 2 fingers. She wore a black t-shirt for a band I'd never heard of, her jeans had holes in the knees, and her hair was a messy, dark shag that fell into her eyes. In our world of pressed slacks and pastel colors, she was an oil slick on a pristine puddle. She caught me staring and gave me a crooked, knowing smile. "Don't tell my mom," she said, her voice a little gravelly. "She thinks I'm in here repenting." She made air quotes with the fingers of her free hand. I think I fell in love with her right then. Not in the way I understood love to be, not the chaste, church-approved hand-holding that led to a modest wedding, but in a way that felt like a secret key turning in a lock I didn't know existed inside me. It was a terrifying, exhilarating click. We became friends after that. In a town with only 40 kids in the entire high school, it wasn't hard, but our friendship felt different. It was an alliance. We were two islands in a sea of beige conformity. Amy was everything I wasn't. Bold, fearless, and utterly unconcerned with what people thought of her. The biggest problem was that I'd failed my permit test twice. My dad said I had a lead foot and the spatial awareness of a stunned squirrel, which was probably fair. This meant I was grounded, car-wise, for the foreseeable future. So Amy drove. Her car was a beat-to-hell Ford pickup that smelled like old coffee, gasoline, and her cheap cherry perfume. We called it the Beast. Most of our time together was spent after dark. We'd wait until my parents' bedroom light went out, then I'd slip out my window and she'd be there, the Beast idling quietly at the end of our long dirt driveway, her headlights off. We'd drive for hours, down endless gravel roads that cut through the black seas of corn and soy. We'd listen to her scratchy mixtapes and talk about everything and nothing. Our dreams of escaping Harmon, the stupid things our teachers said, the suffocating weight of everyone's expectations. Those nights in the Beast were the only times I felt like I could breathe. The world opened up. Under the vast, star-dusted Kansas sky, Harmon and its church spires and its judgmental eyes felt small and a million miles away. In the dim glow of the dashboard lights, I could be myself, and so could she. One night, parked out by the old abandoned quarry, the cicadas buzzing their deafening summer song, Amy killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy. We just sat there for a long time, looking at the moon's reflection on the still, black water. "Ellie," she said, her voice softer than usual. "Can I tell you something? Something I've never told anyone?" My heart started thumping against my ribs. "Yeah, of course." She took a long, shaky breath and turned to face me. Her eyes, even in the dark, were so incredibly clear. "I don't like boys," she said. Not like I'm supposed to. I like girls." The air in the cab of the truck suddenly felt thin. I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and thrilling, what was coming next. The world narrowed to the space between us. "I like you," she whispered. And then she leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a chaste peck. It was soft and hesitant at first, then firm, and it tasted like cherry chapstick and secrets. Every nerve in my body lit up like a switchboard. It was the most right, most natural thing I had ever felt in my life. And for a few perfect seconds, I kissed her back. Then the teachings of Pastor Dave and a lifetime of Bible study verses crashed through my head like a battering ram. Abomination, unnatural, a sin against God and man. A little spark of hellfire, which they'd been so careful to plant in all of us, flared up in my gut. I'd love to tell you I was brave. I'd love to say that I didn't harbor any of that deep-seated, internalized homophobia that our town had beat into every one of us since birth. But I can't. The reality is a part of me was terrified. Not of her, but of myself, of what that kiss meant. I pulled away, a strangled noise escaping my throat. I shoved the truck door open and stumbled out into the humid night. "Ellie, wait," Amy called, her voice cracked with confusion and hurt. "I can't," I gasped, and I ran. I ran down the gravel road, my lungs burning, not stopping until I was home, safe in my room with the door locked. I ignored her for the next 3 days. She called the house phone, and I told my mom I was busy. She left a note in my locker, and I threw it away without reading it. I saw her truck parked outside the diner, and I crossed the street to avoid walking past. Each time, a fresh wave of shame and guilt washed over me. I wanted to see her, but the fear was stronger. The little preacher in my head was screaming too loud. On the 4th day, Amy disappeared.
It started as a rumor at school, then a frantic call from her mother to mine. By evening, Sheriff Miller's car was parked in her driveway. Amy hadn't come home. Her truck, the beast, was gone. No one had seen or heard from her. I immediately assumed the worst, and my stomach twisted into a knot of pure ice. My mind reeled with two equally horrific possibilities. One, someone had seen us at the quarry. Someone had found out she was gay, and in a town like Harmon, that was a dangerous secret to have. Maybe some boys from the football team had decided to teach her a lesson. Or two, she had run away. Because of me. Because I had rejected her and made her feel like a freak. The thought that my last action toward her was one of cowardice and cruelty made me so sick I couldn't eat. The town buzzed. Search parties were organized. Flyers with Amy's smiling black and white school picture were tacked to the bulletin boards at the post office and the grocery store. Days bled into a week. The hope in people's voices started to fray. The next Sunday, the church was packed. People came seeking comfort, answers. Pastor Dave stood at the pulpit, his face grave. He spoke of the prodigal son, of lost sheep, and then his tone shifted. It hardened. He boomed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Sometimes, he said, our children stray from the path. They are tempted by the dark and sinful whispers of the world. And sometimes God, in his infinite and terrible wisdom, must make an example. His judgment is swift. We must pray for Amy's soul, that she might find repentance wherever she may be. He didn't say the words, but everyone knew what he meant. He was calling her a sinner. He was framing her disappearance not as a tragedy, but as a righteous punishment. He was saying she deserved it. Something in me snapped. The years of forced smiles and quiet obedience evaporated in a blaze of pure rage. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Every head turned to me. My mom grabbed my arm, her face a mask of horror. I shook her off. "You're wrong," I said, my voice shaking but loud enough for the first few pews. And I stormed out, slamming the heavy oak doors behind me. The gasp from the congregation was the last thing I heard before I was out in the blinding Kansas sun. I had never felt so alone and so certain I was right. That night, I was in my room, staring out at the fields, when I heard it. A small ting against the glass of my window. My blood ran cold. I crept closer, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Another ting, louder this time. I peered through a gap in the curtains. And I saw her. Standing at the edge of my lawn, where the neatly cut grass met the wild tangle of the tree line, was Amy. The breath I didn't realize I was holding came out in a ragged sob of relief. It was a physical thing, like a lead weight being lifted from my chest. She was okay. She hadn't been killed. She hadn't run away forever. She had come back. I threw the window open, leaning into the cool night air. "Amy, oh my God, where have you been? Are you okay? Everyone's been looking for you." She just smiled, a wide, lazy smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm fine, Ellie," she said. Her voice was right, but flat, like a recording. "Come on out. I want to show you something." She gestured with her head towards the dark woods behind her. A sick feeling, a cold, oily dread began to curdle in my stomach, overriding my relief. Something was wrong. "Amy, what's going on? Where is your truck?" I asked, stalling. "Doesn't matter. Just come with me. It's in the forest. It's beautiful." Her smile stayed fixed in place, an expression plastered on her face.
That's when I started to notice the small things, the details that were just off. Amy was a fidgeter. She was always pushing her hair out of her eyes or tapping her foot or worrying the hem of her sleeve. This girl stood perfectly, unnaturally still. The moonlight caught her face and her eyes seemed too wide, too dark, and they weren't blinking. Not once. And her clothes? She was wearing the same black t-shirt and jeans she had on the night I ran from her. They looked pristine, not like she'd been living in them for a week. There wasn't a speck of dirt on them.
I knew, in that instant, with a gut-deep animal certainty that defied all logic, I knew that the thing standing on my lawn was not Amy. The real Amy was gone, and this thing was wearing her like a suit. I can't, I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. My parents will hear me. The smile on its face didn't falter,
but an edge crept into its voice. That flat, recorded tone now had a sharp undertone of impatience. "They're asleep, Ellie. I've been watching. They won't wake up. Come on, I missed you." It replayed her voice, but the words felt hollow, a cheap imitation. I started to back away from the window, my hands trembling. "Don't you want to come with me?" it coaxed, taking a step forward out of the shadows. "We can go for a drive, just like we used to." As it moved into a patch of light from my bedroom window, I saw something else. Around its neck was the tiny silver cross necklace Amy always wore, a gift from her grandmother, but it was hanging upside down. My mind was screaming, a silent, frantic litany of no, 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 not real, not Amy. "I'm not coming out," I said, trying to make my voice firm. The smile on its face finally dropped. It vanished completely, leaving behind a blank, slack-jawed expression. The head tilted at an angle that was too sharp, too fast, an angle that would have made a human neck pop. "Yes, you are." The voice was no longer Amy's. It was a layered, distorted chorus of clicks and whispers that was somehow shaped into words. It moved with impossible speed. One moment it was on the lawn, the next it was scrambling up the side of my house, fingers and toes finding purchase in the siding like some obscene insect. It was at my window in a second, its face pressed against the screen. The eyes were black, pupilless pits. It smelled of damp soil and something rotten, like meat left in the sun. I screamed and slammed the window shut, fumbling with the lock just as it began to claw at the screen, tearing through the mesh with long, pale fingers. It looked like Amy, but it was all wrong. Its limbs were too long, its joints bent at slightly the wrong places. Then it started to speak again, and this is the part that haunts me more than any other. It wasn't the chorus of whispers anymore. It was my own voice. It was my voice, panicked and breathless from the night by the quarry. "I can't." It mimicked my own terrified sob, perfectly reproduced. "This is wrong." I scrambled back, falling over my desk chair and landing hard on the floor. My heart felt like it was going to explode. The thing ripped the screen away and began to pound on the glass. "Disgusting!" It snarled, again in my voice, using the word I'd thought but never dared say out loud. It was playing back my own deepest shame, my own bigotry, and using it as a weapon. The glass spider-webbed with cracks. With a final sickening crunch, the pane shattered inward. The thing dropped into my room, landing in a low crouch that a person shouldn't be able to hold. As I crab-walked backwards, desperate to get away, it lunged. Its arms shot out, impossibly long. I threw myself sideways, but its fingers, hard and sharp as bits of bone, raked across my forearm. A searing, cold pain shot up my arm, so intense it was dizzying. It didn't feel like a cut. It felt like being branded with ice. A fresh scream tore from my throat, one of both pain and terror, and it propelled me to my feet. I fled my room, slammed my bedroom door, and sprinted down the hall to the front of the house. I could hear it behind me, a wet thud against the door, then silence. Its footsteps were unnaturally quiet, but I could feel its presence chasing me, a wave of cold air at my back. I reached the front door, my fingers slipping on the deadbolt. I finally got the lock to turn and threw the door open, stumbling out onto the porch. My plan was to run to the nearest neighbor, a quarter-mile down the road, but as I turned, I saw it. It stood in the doorway of my house, half in, half out at the shadows, but it wasn't crossing the threshold. It just stood there, one foot on the welcome mat, a look of confusion on its wrong Amy face, as if there was an invisible barrier it couldn't pass. It looked at me and its jaw unhinged, opening far too wide, and it let out a screech, a sound that wasn't human or animal. It was a high-frequency, grating noise that felt like it was tearing at the inside of my skull. Then, as if giving up, it backed away from the door. It turned its gaze towards the woods from whence it came, and it slunk back into the yard. Its movements were what truly broke my mind. It moved backwards, its limbs contorting, the spine seeming to ripple and bend at impossible angles. It dropped to all fours, its body folding in on itself like a collapsing spider, and scuttled with terrifying speed into the tree line, disappearing into the absolute dark. I stood on that porch until the sun came up, shaking so hard I thought my teeth would crack. I looked down at my arm. 3 parallel gashes wept thin, dark blood. The skin around them was already pale and puckered, as if touched by frost. I cried that night. I cried until I had nothing left. I wasn't crying because I almost died. I was crying because in that moment, I knew with a bone-deep finality that the only girl I had ever loved was gone forever. I don't know what happened to the real Amy. Maybe that thing got her out on a dark road. Maybe those boys from town did get to her. Maybe she just ran away to escape the suffocating hate of Harmon and me. And the thing that came to my window was just a terrible coincidence. I will never know. And that, I've learned, is the worst part. The not knowing is a wound that never, ever scabs over. I moved away from Harmon the day I turned 18, and I have never been back. My life is quiet now. It's safe. Even now as I type this, my fingers trace the 3 pale lines on my arm. They didn't heal right. They are a permanent part of me, a physical map of my grief and my terror. They're the one piece of evidence that tells me I didn't imagine it all. So I'm writing this down, all of it, putting it out into the void of the internet. I know the odds are 1,000,000,000 to 1, but I have to try. Amy, if you're out there, if you ran away and built a new life for yourself somewhere you could finally breathe, I'm so sorry. I was a coward, and I have never, not for one single day, stopped thinking about you.